It's time to sit back, relax, and listen to Conversations with Joan. Conversations with Joan will inspire, motivate, and empower you. Live your best life now. Listen, learn, think, and decide. And now, here's your host, Joan Herman.
Welcome to Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life's Conversations with Joan. I'm Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in. Conversations with Joan focuses on topics that are important to your life, from health and wellness to professional development to personal well-being. Change makers join me to share their insights, tips, and strategies so you can thrive and live your best life now. Thank you for taking time for yourself, and thank you for letting us be a part of your life. Now, let's start talking. What makes someone a leader? Today's guest, Ash Beckham, challenges us to embrace a different vision of leadership, one in which we stop focusing on external authorities and start reclaiming our own ability to create change. According to Ash, we need people to step up and be the change they wish to see in the world. Ash is an inclusion activist, leadership expert, professional trainer, and author of Step Up, How to Live with Courage and Become an Everyday Leader. Welcome, Ash. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, great to be here, John. Thanks for having me.
So, Ash, you say that you had no intention of entering the public speaking space, and yet here you are. So, how did you get started doing this type of work?
Well, it was about 10 years ago, and I was inspired by seeing somebody else do it. There was an event in Boulder called Ignite that I went to, which is, if you've ever seen the platform, you have 5 minutes exactly. The slides auto-advance every 15 seconds. Their tagline is, enlighten us, but make it quick. So it was this really just very fun event that happened in town, and I went to go see it for the first time, and there was a guy there that talked about his ups and downs with weight loss, and he was nobody in Boulder talks about that for sure. Men certainly never talk about that, and so to be able to have somebody speak in that way, so authentically, so honestly, the feeling that he evoked in the audience, I was like, I want to do that. So then the next time it came up was like a personal challenge for me. The next time the applications were there, I threw my hat in the ring and knew it was going to have to be something personal and something I was passionate about. And, where I lived, it was a pretty progressive place. So, gay rights, gay marriage really wasn't there. But having kids, friends that had kids, they were really, the use of the word gay in a pejorative way was still very prevalent. And so that's kind of what I landed on and got lucky that it got some traction online, and that led to a TED Talk. And then all of a sudden I was a speaker. It was a tough adjustment for me, but I loved it.
Well, and I find the people that make the greatest impact in the world are people that talk from the heart. They're sharing something that's important to them and personal.
Absolutely. I think that's what resonated, right? It wasn't perfect. It was something, I feel like sometimes we, even 10 years ago, it felt like, we were divisive, and we feel like, our experience is wholly our own, and nobody can relate to it. And if you haven't been through what I've been through, then you don't know what it's like to be me. But that really puts up these walls that are pretty artificial, like we all know what it's like to be afraid of what somebody else thinks. We all are afraid that if we say something or we share our truth, whatever that truth may be, that we'll be isolated or people will see us differently. And it doesn't necessarily matter what that truth is, right? That feeling is the same. And so I tried to kind of bring people together on that concept. And it felt like something that really resonated with some people. So I felt lucky to be able to have that connection.
So then you went on to develop a Step Up program that provides guidance to help cultivate leadership. So how did you make that transition to leadership? And then how did you decide to create this program?
Sure. So it was really, I was lucky enough to be out speaking. I was speaking at universities and in corporate environments and at conferences, and really kind of giving people this idea of inclusive leadership and meeting these incredible people. And I would meet them afterwards, and they would say, "Oh, I loved your program. I love this idea of being a leader. When I ... I'm really going to implement it." And so it was, people were always waiting for something. When I get that degree, when I manage that, when I have 8 direct reports, when I have a budget line that is X amount of dollars, right? It was always something that people were waiting for. And I would ask people in the room, how many people see themselves as leaders? And, depending on the demographics, 30 to 50% of the hands would go up. And then you would ask the same question, who thinks the person sitting to their left is leader? And all the hands would go up. So it was really, it wasn't the fact that people weren't leading, it's that they weren't embracing that role themselves. They weren't seeing themselves in that way. And so that was the piece of step up is it doesn't matter if you're the, Fortune 50 CEO or the captain of the, 10U soccer team. You can lead from exactly where you are. And you don't even have to be the captain, right? You could be the kid that starts on the bench, but everybody can lead from exactly where they are. And so the idea is creating this toolkit, because they say when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we approach leadership in this way of this is how it's supposed to be. We have to be strong, or we have to be bold, or we have to be powerful. And I just don't think that's the case. I think that turns off the concept of leadership to so many people and makes it seem inaccessible. And also, different situations require a different skill set. And so the idea of Step Up was that we would hone these skills, these practices that would allow us in any situation to assess, what do I need? Do I need courage? Do I need a little bit of authenticity, and a lot of humility? Like, what is the exact recipe in the situation to allow me to be the leader that I want and need? That was the evolution.
What you just described, I mean, it's really so on point, because when we think of a leader, we do think it's that person who's in charge of something, but we lead in everything we do every day. And when you start to realize that about yourself, it really does change the way you live your life. And you just started to touch upon it, but you have 8 pillars of leadership. Would you take us through those 8 pillars and just describe them briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. And so the first one is empathy, which to me is the root and the start of everything. Like, you can't get into this work in the way that we discussed if you're not willing to have a willingness to dive in and see what it's like to be in somebody else's shoes. And again, empathy doesn't mean you have to agree with somebody. It's a willingness to understand their why. How did they get there? And if there's no agreement, right, you don't have to even condone what they're doing. You just have to be willing to dive in. Then we can empathize with anybody, right? That really opens it up to me. And then as we move through it, everything develops on each other. So the next one is individuality, and that's really embracing that my leadership style can play to my strengths, right? If I am that really gregarious, outspoken social person, that can be part of my leadership repertoire. And if I'm not, and if I'm more thoughtful and more introverted, then that can play to it as well, because there are people that are like me. There are people that are going to relate to that type of leader. And then we get into grace, which is this, the idea of this like 10,000 foot view that you have to be able to see everything from a larger perspective, that we're really mindful of the way we approach things. And then courage, obviously, no matter how you define courage, it's critical to step into this leadership role, because by definition, we're changing our patterns, and that takes some bravery. And the courage isn't the absence of fear, right? We never get to the point where we're not afraid. Courage is really that idea that we feel the fear, right? That's how we know we're doing the right thing, that we're pushing our limits, and we're brave enough to do it anyway, that we know the result on the other side is worth the fear that we're facing. So that's really what courage is. And then humility, I think when we get some of that courage under our belt, and we have this positive loop of what's happening when we act in this leadership role, we can get a little big for our britches. So how do we keep it in context, right? How do we know? How do we never forget where we've come from and the steps that we've taken, and also know that we don't have all the answers, right? It isn't our role to create a roadmap. It's to empower people to create their own roadmap. And then patience, which is the one that I always have to work on. We just live in a world that demands the opposite of patience, right? Everything is so quick. It happens so quickly. You have to make all of these decisions. But taking that beat, that moment, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to put off that email for a day. But when you feel the reaction, you're having a reaction you don't really want to have, right? Then, or it's a reaction that could be detrimental to your leadership role, go grab a cup of water, go listen to your favorite song, do the thing that breaks that pattern, that really allows you to make the decisions that you want to make, to be the person you want to be, that you can have a reaction, but how do we train ourselves to not be reactive? And then responsibility obviously is huge, that we have to take responsibility for our actions, that when we are courageous, right? Or when we don't practice patience, or when we, do or don't have empathy, we don't exist in a vacuum, right? Like, even though this is our work and this is our practice, that there really is a way that we impact other people. So when we do make those mistakes, how do we address those, correct those, move on, and be better last time? I mean, one of my favorite Maya Angelou quotes is that you do good and until you know better, and then do better, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you learn from those mistakes and stay in it when it gets awkward? And then the last one is authenticity, which is really bringing that all together, which is embracing all of those parts of yourselves and knowing that this is a work in practice and that we're really moving towards something higher. But it isn't going to be without these stumbles and these pitfalls, because if you're not making mistakes, then you're not pushing yourself hard enough. So that kind of like those pillars set up this very welcoming style of leadership that you can embrace the things you're already good at and work at the things that are maybe, inherently challenging to you, but then you have a full tool set to address any leadership situation.
And you and I are talking about these pillars in relationship to leadership, but really, what great traits to embody just to live a happy, empowered life.
Absolutely. And I think, and just, to go back to kids again, or, young kids in our lives, whether they're ours or not, like to think of developing these skills as a, 10, 12, 14, or like as a middle schooler, and to really know yourself that well, to know the things that you practice would just be so empowering to feel grounded in any situation. And like you said, I think that's so critical, right? Like it isn't in these organizational structures where we can be a leader. You see somebody that holds the door for somebody else at the grocery store, or you see somebody who, lets somebody go in front of them in line when they only have 2 items, right? Like there are these acts of kindness that are outside of a work, school, structured environment that are so impactful. Like, to me, that is leadership. And it isn't the people that you on the org chart lead. It's the people that see you and how you behave in your everyday life. And I think that it is, when we practice these things and we evolve into these versions of ourselves that we want to be, that this leadership style and this authentic lifestyle that we live, isn't something we do, it's someone we are. Like, we don't have to think twice about it, because it's just how we operate. And so I think that's the practice piece that's so critical. And just like you said, it isn't something we do at work. It's not like, we close our laptop and then all of a sudden the stuff goes out the window, right? We do it with our kids, we do it with our friends, we do it in our communities. That's the most important part of the work.
And just think of the impact we would have on our relationships, how much more loving and the closeness we could have with another human being just by practicing some of these things you're teaching.
Yeah, and I think when we see that something, I know that patience is so hard for me, but then I see somebody that practices it, and, at first glance, maybe I'm frustrated by the length of time it takes them to do something. But if I really dig in, I can admire, well, they're just patient. They're just mindful. They're just thoughtful. Like I can learn from that. I think, by extension, if we're willing to start off with empathy, we can see the things that are maybe frustrating in others through a different lens and see it really as a strength and something that we would emulate and want to be more like, right? And then when you see that, then like you said, that changes our relationship significantly when we admire the people that, previously we created struggles for.
And just think the impact that it would have if these things were taught to our, let's even say, high school age students or younger. It would have such an impact on bullying and the way we treat other people.
Absolutely. And I think that that's such a critical piece, right? Because kids are so open to that, right? They don't have 30, 40, 50 years of training where some of our reactions or some of our assumptions or some of our biases are so ingrained that they make it harder to break, where kids you're not born hateful, you're not born judgmental, right? Those are learned traits. And the longer we have those, the harder they are to break. But if you take high schoolers, right, and how much of that for them is just social survival, right? They do the things because they're trying to exist in a world that they don't have the tools to be empowered enough to exist in. And so if we can give them the tools to be able to do that, and that becomes our cultural norm, then I think everybody can be this fullest version of themselves. And like you said, it creates these environments where anyone can flourish. Everyone is welcome for exactly who they are, because that's what everyone's doing. There's no mold to fit. There's no box to fit in. Like, you don't even have to fit. You have to fit in somebody else's box. You don't have to fit in your own box, right? Where we take off those limitations and like you said, just think of the impact they could have.
For as long as I've been doing this work, every time I have a conversation like this, I always think to myself, if we could just get to the kids before they get older, my age, and we have to undo all the damage that's been done in the way they think and the way we treat other people. So this is really, I think, so important to get to the kids when they're younger.
Absolutely, 100%. And I think such a huge piece of it is, it's like you said, it's the way we're ingrained. It's what we think. And to me, the first change is, how do we see ourselves, right? How are we willing to dive in and see ourselves as imperfect humans, right? That are working on something, that we can look at ourselves with humility, that we're not trying to, accomplish these things that are set up by other people. But if we can have that, we can feel empowered and grounded and solid in ourselves. I think that's, of course, the first step to being able to extend that to other people. Of course, it's a balance. You don't do it individually, but so much of the judgment, so much of the persecution, so much of that comes from an inability to see one's own strength, right? To see one's limitations not as shortcomings, but as opportunities for advancement. So you said, we can create strong, confident, mindful kids. That's where everything, then the whole game changes, right?
Yeah, because you've been working to try to foster inclusion. And what do you think is the biggest roadblock to what you're seeing out there? Would this be a game changer, or is it something else?
Well, I think this would be a game changer for sure. I think a huge piece of it, honestly, is an inability, not even an inability. Let me rephrase that. An unwillingness to have for parents to have hard conversations with their kids, right? Like if we want to change the way that kids see the world, they are smarter than we give them credit for, and they're figuring stuff out whether we're helping them or not. So our unwillingness to have those difficult conversations, to me, is, conversations that are about things that are hard, like race, like sexuality, like bias, right? And they can all be age appropriate. Those are all things that are normalized. But if we can normalize difference, but I feel like for so much of that, we don't feel comfortable. We don't feel like we have all the answers. And I feel like for so much of that, that's okay. Like, our kids don't expect us to have the answers if we have a willingness to help find the solutions with them. So to me, it's all of this. There's so much that we can say that is external, that needs to be changed. It could be fixed, to do whatever. But if we all did our own work, to me, that would be enough. Then we're moving in the right direction. We're so worried. We let ourselves off the hook in this altruistic way of wanting to make the world a better place. Like, let's keep our own house clean and then go out and do that work.
Well, you're right, because if we don't have the conversation, the kids are going to learn. I mean, when I'm older now. When I was younger, in the dark ages, learning it out on the street was a much different thing than learning it out there now. The messaging, the media, the music, the social media, these kids are going to get a totally different story than the one that you want to teach them.
Absolutely. And I always think of it as, like, if we talk about something that's a more sensitive subject, that's more nuanced, right? So we talk about race, we talk about sexual orientation, we talk about any of those kind of divisive topics that make us squirm a little bit. Like, whoever, the bully in the back of the bus, like, I wouldn't want him to teach my kid algebra. I certainly don't want him to teach my kids about race or confrontation, right? Or any of these significant topics. But like you said, they're going to learn that there anyway. They're going to learn in the back of the bus. They're going to learn it on their phones. They're going to learn it talking about their friends. And not to say, we are the only resource they're ever going to have, but we are that balanced resource. And to have those challenging conversations early, again, we're not going to wrap it up in a 15-second soundbite, right? But what we want is for our kids to come back with questions. We want that door to always be open to us for conversations. And the same with our friends too, right? Like, as an LGBTQ person, I don't want, if somebody says something that's offensive or says something that's hurtful, I give them the benefit of the doubt, right? I think that their ignorance, and not ignorance, stupidity, ignorance, lack of knowledge is something that I can help with, right? And if they're repeatedly saying anything or they're overtly discouraging, sure, like, we can cut ties there, but what I want is I don't want to put them in their place, right? I don't want to, jump up on my soapbox. I want them, when they have a question that's more in-depth, that's more personal, to see me as a resource, right? Not somebody who's going to judge them for not being woke enough or not being enlightened enough, right? And so how do I see that as a leadership role as well? And so I think that's a critical piece is like you said, our kids and other adults, like, they're going to find the resources. Let's do our best to make sure they at least have access to good ones.
Yeah. And, like I've always said, knowledge is power, and it might as well come from us and be the lessons that we want them to learn.
Exactly. And just like you said, like, they're going to hear the other thing. So either they hear the one side of it and they hear nothing, or they hear our version as well. Right. And there's no way that's not additive, that doesn't fit, despite what teenagers would want. Like, there's parts of it that just stick in their brain. But the problem is we just never know what's going to stick. So how do we kind of continue that conversation?
The book is Step Up, How to Live with Courage and Become an Everyday Leader. Ash, where can our listeners go to get more information about you and your work?
Absolutely. Well, they go to ashbeckham.com. That's my website. And then on social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, I'm at Ash Beckham. And then Instagram is at the Ash Beckham. And I'd love to again, have continuing conversations with people and see their how they evolve in these practices and what they do and what their struggles are. And I think we just, celebrate and commiserate together and create a community where we can have these deeper conversations. I think is always additive, because I think the most important thing is for people to know that they're not alone. Like, your struggle it might not be the same as my struggle, but we're all carrying something.
Ash, in our final moments, what's a takeaway? What do you want to leave our listeners with?
I would say if this is something that you're interested in, right, of really embracing that inner leadership that you have, that you inherently have in your body, it exists despite your willingness to see it. I would say do something this week that makes you a little bit nervous, right, that pushes your boundaries of leadership a little bit. And maybe that's just looking yourself in the mirror, looking yourself in the eye and saying, I am a leader. Maybe that's the scariest thing you do. Maybe it's volunteering to be involved in something. Maybe it's having a difficult conversation. But I think we are it's so easy for us to know when we're pushing our limits, because we get that pit in the bottom of our stomach of like, should I do this? It's outside of my comfort zone. I don't know. It doesn't feel right. Like that's it. Because I think what we do is we build our resilience to that. So I would challenge everybody who's willing to be on this journey to do something that makes them a little bit uncomfortable and see and know that you've gotten through 100% of the hard things you've ever done. And so let's build that resilience up and really put you out there as the leader that everyone else sees you to be.
Ash, thank you so much for joining us. This has really been such a great conversation, and I appreciate you being here.
Absolutely, Jen. I love it. And thank you so much for what you do and bringing these voices into the world. They need to hear them so much. So I appreciate you.
Thank you for joining us. I hope you found the show informative. At Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life, we believe that knowledge is power. Take what you've learned, apply it, and live your best life now. Remember that the information provided is the opinion of our guest and should never replace the advice of a professional who knows your personal situation. If you'd like more information, visit our website, cyacyl.com. That stands for Change Your Attitude, Change Your Life. While on our site, listen to past shows on demand, read the digital magazine, sign up for our mailing list, and be sure to follow the show on social media. Until next time, this is Joan Herman. Thanks for tuning in.